All right, before we go any further, let's take care of this one to-do item. We want to take the user back to the login screen if things didn't work the way we expected, or if the username and password don't match what's in our database, whatever the case may be. If the form's not valid, we're going back. So how do we do that? Really simple. We've done it before. Render.template, the response writer, our pointer to our request, the name of the template, which in our case is login.page.tmpl, and a reference to a model's template data, and all we have to populate is our form with our form information. Now, back in our login page, of course, we want to be able to test this, so we'll put no validate in here right now. And back in our handlers, after we've rendered that, we want to return. We don't want to process any further in the application. So if we've done this properly, and I think we have, we should be able to stop our application if it's running, start the application, go back to our web browser, reload this page, and try just submitting nothing. And it says this field, that's exactly what we wanted. So you notice here, this actually should be an email. So there's one more check we should put in here, which is form.isEmail, and the field is email. We may as well do that. Let's stop that, start it again, make sure that works. It will, but I like to validate things. And we'll put in something that's not an email, and we'll put a password in this time. Invalid email address. Perfect. Okay, and of course it's trying to save my password. I have to disable that at some point. Anyway, that seems to be working. All right, so validation's taken care of. What's our next step? Well, our next step is after we've successfully logged this user in, we've stored this user ID in the session. And what we want to do now is to write some middleware and possibly a helper function to determine whether or not someone is logged in. So let's go over to our helpers file to start with, which is, well, I'll just find it this way, helpers.go. There it is. And I'm going to create a new function, which I'm going to call isAuthenticated. And it's going to take what? Well, pretty straightforward. It's going to take the request, which is a pointer to an http.request, and it's going to return a Boolean. True if someone is authenticated, false if they are not. And it's going to be as simple as this. Exists equals app.session.exists, and then it needs the context, r.context, which is passed as a parameter to this function, and that I'm looking for a particular entry in that, and that entry is user_ID. So I somehow deleted that closing parentheses. And then I just return exists. And that's it. So there's a function in my helper that I can always call from anywhere I have access to the helpers to see if someone is authenticated. Now let's open our middleware. So let's find our middleware right here, and let's write some new middleware. Now I'll call this middleware auth. Just as simple as that. And like all middleware, it'll take a parameter of next, which is http.handlerType, and it will return an http.handler as well. Now, one thing that's different about this middleware and say this one or this one is that here I actually need to have access to the request, because in this middleware I'm going to call that helper function isAuthenticated that we just created, and it requires a pointer to the http.request as a parameter. And we can get that, and we can get that by doing something a little bit differently in this middleware. We're going to have a return, so this is going to return an HTTP handler. So how am I going to get that handler? By calling HTTP handler func and having as its parameter an anonymous function, which will be named func because it's just an anonymous function. And it will take as parameters w, http.responseWriter, and r, which is a pointer to http.request. And that's what I wanted. And I can do that because I'm returning something that has access to the response writer and the request from the HTTP handler func. So I've now done this. And inside of that, the body of this function is where I can actually call helpers isAuthenticated. If not, helpers.isAuthenticated and pass it that request, the pointer to the HTTP request, then if they're not authenticated, what do I want to do? Well, I need to put an error message in there, session.put, and I'm going to put in the session from r.context, because the session needs that. And I'll put in error, and I'll put in the message log in first. And then after that, I'll do a redirect, http.redirect, WR, and I'm going to redirect them to the login screen, user login, http.status, see other. And at that point, I will return. I don't want anything else to happen. So this middleware is something I can apply to routes that I want to protect. Now, of course, I can't stop there. I need to actually do the next.serve HTTP and put in the W and R, like we do with all good middleware. So what this is doing, this is exactly the same logic as the nosurf or as the session load, but it's our own custom middleware that actually has access to the request, so we can call helpers.isAuthenticated. And if this doesn't fail, then we just pass on to the next middleware, if any, and the request lifecycle continues on its merry way. So this is going to be incredibly useful because we can use this middleware to protect routes in our routes file to ensure that only people who are logged in actually have access to the routes that we want to protect. So we've got this built, and we will take care of implementing it in the next lecture.